Thank you, Aaron. Again, my name is Ron Nichols, and I'm going to be the first presenter in talking about establishing a crime gun intelligence program within your agency and region. Next. These are the participants. Pam is the Chief of Forensic Science Division at Contra Costa County. She's going to be talking about the program that she set up there. And Captain David Salazar will do the same with regard to the Milwaukee Police Department. Next. This is the third of a six-part series. There were already 2 parts that were offered, including a grant writing workshop, and then last month, making gun crime a priority in your region. This will be establishing the crime gun intelligence program within your agency. To follow will be 3 very key webinars. The first one will focus on the investigative aspects of crime gun intelligence. The one after that will focus on forensics at the speed of crime, because what we've discovered is that this firearm-related evidence can be processed much quicker than many laboratories are used to being able to process evidence. And then the last one will be NIBIN for prosecutors, how to effectively prosecute using crime gun intelligence in terms of connecting a whole slew of shootings together. Next. A crime gun intelligence program is a multidisciplinary approach, and what that means is that many different people are involved in what's going on. Focusing on criminal activity involving gun violence to include connecting of criminal activity, identification and targeting of shooters and their sources of crime guns for immediate disruption, investigation, and prosecution. It doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to be arresting every shooter for all the shootings that they were responsible for. But what it does mean is that an effective crime gun intelligence program will work to get the active shooters off the streets, which is the most critical aspect. In Denver, they were showing, and a perf study demonstrated that it takes about 6 months to replace a shooter on the streets when a shooter is removed, so that they have that window of safety, if you will. Next. It's important to understand that a crime gun intelligence program looks at everything inside and outside a gun. Inside a gun includes the marks that are present on bullets and cartridge cases, primarily cartridge cases at this point. And on the outside, we have serial numbers, which can allow for e-tracing of firearms. We can have fingerprints, and we can also have DNA. So there's a lot of different types of evidence and a lot of different things that can be involved with firearm-related evidence that we should be concerned about and have knowledge of. Next. And because the inside and the outside tell the whole story. No, go ahead. Next. Sorry. Establishing a CGI program within your agency is going to involve identifying the proper balance of people, processes, and technology. And there's 4 critical components. One is comprehensive collection. And what that means is everything goes into the system. Whether it be, many agencies will focus on test fires, but it is just as important, if not more important, to get all firearm-related evidence from shootings into the system. Because what they've been demonstrating is that there are far more links between shootings than there are between recovered guns and shootings. And the second one is timeliness. And this will be the primary focus of the 5th webinar, in terms of providing leads to investigators within 24 to 72 hours of a firearm-related offense. What we found is, and a study demonstrated, is that after just a week, the value of investigative leads drops precipitously. So it's important to get those leads to the investigators as quickly as possible. The third component will be the follow-up, will be the focus of the next webinar, which is investigative follow-up. And then the 4th critical component is feedback, and helping everybody to understand and know their role within the system. Next. A successful CGI program will involve a well-coordinated team, both investigators, forensic experts, and prosecutors, who manage the handoff and exchanges of required data and information. And what this means is responding and collecting information and evidence, extracting and analyzing the information and evidence, and pursuing information and evidence, as well as apprehending suspects. And I'll show you a pie chart in the next slide. Next. As you can see on the right-hand side, there is that pie chart, and basically this is broken down into thirds. And what we have to do is identify a way to bridge the gaps to handle the traffic flow between responding and collecting, extracting and analyzing, and pursuing and apprehending. It continues in a circle, and the information will fuel the investigation while the evidence empowers prosecutions. Next. Now we have a couple poll questions, and the first one is, does your agency currently submit your ballistic evidence and test fires from crime guns to be entered into the NIBIN database? And if you are a prosecutor, do the agencies within your region do the same? Now, NIBIN is a national program by which cartridge cases are entered into a database, and then they are searched regionally and can be searched nationally. But what NIBIN does is, by participating in the program, NIBIN provides links that would have otherwise gone unknown to investigators, not only within a region, but also within a larger, potentially within the state or nationally as well.
Great, thanks, Ron. And just so you know, we've got about 60% of the audience has voted. We'll give everyone about 10 more seconds to respond, and then we'll close out the poll and share the results with folks. Obviously, you have to have access to your keyboard and mouse in order to be able to do that. And we still have some votes coming in. It's really interesting results here. All right, Ron, I'm going to go ahead and close the poll and share the results. And as I'm sure you can see, we have about 77% of the audience voted, 67% indicated yes to this question, 14% no, and 19% were not sure.
Okay, thank you. Next. Now, eTrace is a program, again, of the federal government ATF, where guns can be traced electronically to identify source. So the question that this poses is, does your agency currently trace recovered firearms through the ATF eTrace program? Yes, no, or not sure. What we found is that many agencies aren't aware of this program, or if they are aware of the program, they only use it sporadically.
Thanks, Ron. The poll is open. We've got about 60% of the audience that has voted. We'll leave it open for about another 10 or 15 seconds. And again, this is the second of two polls, so you don't have to be quite so quick on the mouse or keyboard once we're done with this poll. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close down the poll. Thank you for everyone that did take the time to vote. We have about 70% of the audience that has voted. 66% indicated yes, 15% indicated no, and 19% indicated that they weren't sure. Okay.
Now I'm going to pass it off to Pam, and she's going to talk about successes in Contra Costa County.
Excellent. Thank you, Ron. So I just presented this at a California Association of Criminalists meeting. So just to give you a little bit of background on our firearms unit, we have about 4.5 criminalists. So we have 4 crims full-time assigned to the unit and 1 criminalist part-time. And we have 1 technician that does the majority of our NIBIN entries in the laboratory here. We're a regional lab, so we have 24 different agencies 24 different styles of requests, and 24 different takes on the 2 slides that you just saw earlier with Ron. So some people participate in the NIBIN 100%, and other people we have to call and ask them to bring in the evidence so we can get that stuff going. That's probably our biggest challenge. Our lab handles typically around 1,000 requests per year for the firearms unit. That's not all NIBIN related. That includes make and model, function determination, serial number restoration, and some shoe print impression evidence as well. So I want to give you the impression that we're a high productive or throughput laboratory. We do get a lot of NIBIN requests. And as our success has taken hold, we're getting more and more requests. More and more agencies are recognizing this, the usefulness of NIBIN and the interconnectedness of the different agencies, both within a county, Contra Costa County, which is very large, and outside of our county, which includes, of course, a freeway that runs from the north all the way down through the county to the south. And as you can imagine, as in any other major metropolitan area, or in our situation, the Bay Area, we have a lot of shootings on the highways and the freeways that are of major concern to public safety, law enforcement agencies, and the DA's office. When I started in the unit a couple of years ago, we did not have NIBIN. We had a small treaty for NIBIN access. The amount of leads exploded exponentially. We used to get 3 to 4 leads with Evo Finder. We're getting anywhere from 30 to over 100 leads per month with NIBIN. And again, part of that success story is the more leads we get, the more people recognize that we should get the evidence in sooner. And now we're connecting more and more cases with real-time actionable intelligence. And that is the bottom line. Yeah, my background is DNA, but the bottom line is we want to help every investigation, regardless of the underlying discipline that is being applied to at the lab here. We also made some other improvements to the workflow, and I'm going to walk you through some of the slides that indicate those changes. So if you go to the next slide, we'll go to just kind of the introduction of IBIS tracks. Back in the summer of 2015, we actually went live online with NIBIN in November of 2015, and within a few weeks started getting our hits. Next slide. This is one of our technicians. He's our NIBIN technician, Brian Lacoste. That's our IBIS track system, and he's looking at some images on the screen there. Next slide. We incorporated, in order to streamline workflow, we incorporated iPads. We're now moving to Surface Pros because you can do a little bit more with the Surface Pro, and our LIM system is PC based, so it's a little easier to connect. But right now we're almost paperless with our case files on firearms, thanks to incorporating state-of-the-art technology such as iPads or Surface Pros to document and record evidence as it comes in and evidence as it's set up for either a NIBIN entry or a direct comparison of a test fire gun to crime scene evidence. Next slide. For example, we use the barcode. When evidence comes in, it gets barcoded, entered into our LIM system, and then assigned a unique laboratory number. And then all of the steps that are taken in the case flow process are recorded through our LIM system and through documentation with iPad or a Surface Pro. Next slide. We were very lucky as we were moving forward with getting increasing our workload. We were very lucky to be part of the beta test site for the National NIBIN Correlation Training Center in Huntsville, Alabama. In other words, when the NIBIN evidence samples or the test-fired samples are entered into NIBIN, instead of my 2 comparative ID criminalists looking at correlations and determining if there's a match or not in the system, the CTC people over in Alabama are doing that for us. That has dramatically increased our ability to handle the other services and to rely on my comparison ID guys just for comparison IDs as a case goes to trial, or as a detective makes the request and actually asks for a direct comparison ID to confirm what NIBIN's already pointing us to through the lead. So it's really important. It's changed our life, actually, having CTC do our correlations. And I believe we're one of the lucky 20 laboratories or NIBIN sites within the United States to have this afforded to us. So along with CTC, next slide, we recognize that if we looked at other models, for example, the Oakland Police Department Crime Lab has a presumptive match report based on the markings on your test fires or your crime scene evidence, cartridge cases, shell casings, Becky's, we call it brass, right? We would be able to write a report that says there's a presumptive match, and that is something that the DA's office will accept for charging and moving forward into a trial stage. Obviously, for a trial, you're going to have your comparison ID confirmed, but to start out with a presumptive match truly speeds up the entire through not just NIBIN, but through state-of-the-art technology, things that I've already pointed out, the iPad, Surface Pro. We'll be talking about gun ops next, but things that are absolutely connecting and providing information in a way that has never been done before. In my experience as a lab director for the last 20 years. So truly, this is a new phenomenon to be able to capture information and share it and use it in a way that propels an investigation in ways that have never been done. So I'd like to say that we've really changed the way we work at our laboratory thanks to these additional accomplishments and strategies. And it does, the first slide, well, let's just say that it takes a lot of collaborative effort, working with ATF, working with forensic technology or Ultra for the NIBIN aspect, working with our counterparts within the state and outside of the state of California has really allowed us to make the most improvements to be successful, to add to the prevention of crime and gun violence. And that obviously is our bottom line, is we want to prevent that next shooting, that next homicide, that next collateral tragedy. And by incorporating all of these different steps and game plans, we've really, I believe, have made that difference. Next slide. Just to give you an idea of the work throughput that we've been able to change up in my laboratory, even though we've reduced our staff, we've got over 139. It's probably about 200% increase in requests at this point from 2014 to 2017, let's say first quarter 2017. As of today, our backlog is of all requests is 73 for the entire firearms unit, which is unheard of. And for NIBIN requests, we're at about 20 cases backlogged. We can turn around a case as soon as the gun comes in, as soon as the evidence comes in. If it's a rush case, we can turn it around within 24 hours. Typically, once it's assigned to an analyst, a NIBIN entry would take anywhere from 24 to 72 hours to turn around. Next slide. In the PowerPoint, there are a bunch of slides. I'm going to just briefly go through those. This is showing our ballistic imaging numbers as far as number requests, number completed. Next slide. And that's ballistic imaging. That is NIBIN entries, cases requested. As you can see, we're over 1,000 cases overall. And then this slide was produced a few months ago. We're already down to, like I said, about 73 backlog. Next slide. And the time to the request date to lead has dramatically changed. Like I said, it's kind of like a new world for us from the days of EVO to NIBIN 2013. It was over 700 days to get a lead, and now it's basically real time, as I like to say, real time for the first time. Next slide. And these are the trends in firearm submissions. We're getting almost double the amount of guns at this point in 2017. This only shows 2016. Next slide. Finally, there's a kind of composite of all those informations. The metrics that we use as for myself as a lab director that I need to present to my boss, the assistant sheriff, and eventually the sheriff, of course, is how many cases do we receive? How many can we complete? What's the turnaround time? What's the analyst turnaround time and whatnot? So I present this kind of information to command staff meetings, and most of the response at this point in today's most recent meeting, which was last Wednesday, is holy mackerel, you guys are doing some great things. So I can't thank everybody enough for the input that we've received, the assistance we have received. Next slide. And I'd say, since 2015, since we incorporated NIBIN into our program, into our firearm system, we've received over 500 leads. Over 30% are connected to shootings or homicides with a gun outside of the county. And if you count the shootings and homicides outside of the county that are connected to shootings within the county, that 30% goes up to about 45%. We've reduced the turnaround time. Of course, that number does not seem very impressive, but that's because thanks to being in the Correlation Training Center, we can actually attack the aged backlog, those are cases that were submitted over a decade ago. So the turnaround time reflects when it was actually requested, say in 2007, and now we have these long turnaround times. We're actually concerned about what we like to present is we're getting the information and the current shootings, and those are the most important, right? If you have a case that happened 10 years ago, chances are your witnesses are not going to be around. Your evidence may not even be around. If we get a case, if we finally enter it into NIBIN, it may make or break a homicide case where there's no other lead. But frankly, after for any kind of aggravated assault, it's not going to do much good. But we have taken it upon ourselves to tackle that backlog, just to say that we've covered every corner, we've dotted every I and crossed every T in our county as far as gun crime. Next slide. The challenges that I find include getting the evidence to the lab from all the different agencies, 24 different agencies, huge geographic swath here. And if I can add, we're looking at the the Memphis PD model of having a drop box for those shell casings. We don't want to have a gun in a drop box, but we want to have the shell casings in a one-stop shopping envelope, very similar to what we do in our toxicology unit, where you have blood and urine. An officer may make a DUI stop, and there's going to be blood or urine collected as part of that investigation. Obviously, the lab is not open at 3 in the morning, but we have a drop box for blood and urines in our property and in our booking station. So the idea is to do the same, follow that same model of getting evidence to the lab sooner than having to contact and recontact agencies to say, hey, saw it on the news, you had a shooting on Highway 4, can you bring that evidence in? Wouldn't it be nice to have a one-stop shopping envelope? It doubles as a lab request and a chain of custody. It's placed into a one-way only drop box, and then it's collected every morning and brought to the lab for instant NIBIN entry. That's our game plan. That's going to be the next improvement to our workflow, and I think that will really handle and address this kind of delay in submitting of evidence. Next slide. The other thing I'd like to point out is we are a fee-for-service laboratory, but we don't charge for test fires and we don't charge for NIBIN entries. So another aspect of improving and succeeding in any NIBIN or firearms unit is getting the word out to your stakeholders and your customers that, you know, we want all the evidence, bring it all in. We're going to swab it for DNA. We're going to process it for latent prints. That there is no charge on any of those processes. We're interested in solving crime, in preventing crime. And the bottom line is, with everybody's participation, there'll be less crime, gun-related crime, if we keep on going at the rate we're going. Next slide. I wanted to add as a future additional point is the gun ops program, which actually basically does a crime analysis and map of different incidents, gun shootings, homicides with a gun, and ties it into license plate reader and shot spotter. Other tools in the toolbox, when you tie it all together, the amount of information that would be provided to detectives and investigators in real time, again, is off the charts and will only enhance anybody's ability to connect the dots sooner, get a hold of suspects, get the search warrants going, and get additional evidence to kind of tie up your investigation. So with that, I'm just going to say thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to field questions at the end of the presentation.
Thank you, Pam. I think Captain Salazar, you're up.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. My name's Dave Salazar. I'm a law enforcement officer for the past 22 years. And currently, I run our Intelligence Fusion Center, which has really become a crime gun intelligence center since about 2014. So if you can go ahead one, or next. Within our area. So we have kind of struggled at times with our regional counterpart, who is our regional crime lab. And as we stood up the program, there was some conflict there. So from my perspective, it's very much a local process, but it can be adapted to a regional process like what Pam has. But the big thing is focusing on the collection, the analysis, and ultimately the management of crime gun data. So the pieces that we are on a daily basis looking at are the things that I have here. These are the most important pieces of data or information that you need to be able to leverage quickly and effectively. For us, it's our record management system, which is our crime reports. Obviously, that's your bread and butter, what's happening on the street. And then there's the criminal intelligence, and that's what I like to say is what's really going on the street. That's not in the reports. It's everything from the social media to the debriefs to the human source intelligence. It's combining those two pieces, which I think us in law enforcement have done well for a long time. the big force multiplier is bringing in the NIBIN data, knowing the life of a gun, knowing the life of a cartridge casing, knowing which events are linked to which events. If you combine that with the reported crime and your criminal intelligence, you're going to be that much more ahead of the game. The next force multiplier is the E-trace, is knowing where the gun came from. Is it a trend or pattern with the specific supplier? Is it stolen firearms or allegedly stolen firearms that are being unlawfully reported to from drug users? It's all this type of information, but you have to be looking at the E-trace to see where the flow of firearms are coming from. Being able to quickly leverage your court records, because a lot of the people that we deal with in our community that are involved in firearms violence have significant records. The corrections data is a huge piece. Having a good relationship with your Department of Corrections, your Sheriff's Department, whoever is your local jail stops or intelligence gathering stops, you have to be able to leverage that data. And for us, we're a shot spotter city, so being able to look out into the into our neighborhoods and see what's not being reported to us. We're between a third to 50%, or I'm sorry, 2/3 to 50%, depending which neighborhood you're in the area of the city, and that's where we put ShotSpotter because it's most needed there. Within 1 square mile, we were only getting a 911 call for ShotSpotter alerts 16% of the time. So 84% of the time, we weren't getting notified. So which one would you rather deploy to as a commander? 16% of the information or 84% of the information? So kind of a rhetorical question. But so when we created our CJIC, which I wholeheartedly advertise that I stole this concept from the Denver CJIC, so thank you very much, Denver, and we continue to improve upon their process. I was asked to write a mission statement, and that's what this is. Our mission is to prevent gun violence. That's the most important thing that we do on a daily basis. It's not arresting the offender. It's not getting the casings into NIBIN. It's not any of that stuff. It's stopping the next harmful event on the street. So how do we do that? We do that through a consistent production of timely, and timely is probably the most important piece, precise and actionable intelligence that relates to gun crimes. Our armed offenders, because we know our armed offenders are repeat offenders, and they're not going to stop and change. They're going to continue to shoot, kill, maim until they're targeted. And that's what this mission is about, is trying to do all these strategies cohesively to stop the next crime from occurring. Please go ahead. So what we found out over some trials and tribulations, we did not definitely stand up our CJIC in any type of best practices. It was very cumbersome and it wasn't coordinated. So what I try to tell people is learn from our mistakes and be as collaborative as possible before you plug the machine in. Try to get everybody that could potentially have a piece of this effort on board, be talking to them, invite them to the planning meetings, make them a full partner, and truly a full partner, because once someone's a partner, they will eventually buy in and they'll see the obvious advantages to it. So for us, these are our partners. For us, it's a Metropolitan Police Department. We are a NIBIN site. Our state crime lab, which is down the street here, they service our region, which is great because they're pulling all the suburban crime in and the crime that happens on the freeways. That's great, but that took a long time. If we had done this in retrospect, the crime lab would have been our very, very first partner to try to build a relationship with. Our Sheriff's Department, which is the greater metropolitan agency that we sit within, our suburban agencies, identifying our suburban agencies that had gun crime consistently, have become powerful partners, because what we found out, like with any other crimes, like with burglars or auto thieves, they don't care about little lines on maps. They will go anywhere and commit a crime, and that's what we're finding with the NIBIN data. So identifying those suburban agencies or nearby agencies that might have a similar crime trend, and you'll realize that you're sharing criminals. Obviously, the ATF's been a great partner in this. They bring the NIBIN to the table. Our other federal friends, the FBI, DEA, the marshals, we have a HIDTA drug task force within our agency, and then our prosecutors. Getting them on board at the beginning was very key to get them to accept the use of this type of evidence for an investigative lead was key. We had been stuck in the mantra of always needing to have something confirmed by an examiner, and at the time we had one examiner in Wisconsin for a state of 5 million people. So that wasn't working. We had to educate our prosecutors, and once they were educated and became comfortable with it, it was a lot easier to move ahead. And again, then our DOC partners, and unfortunately, we have to partner with our juvenile DOC partners because our shooters are getting younger and younger. So these are all different pieces of the puzzle that you need to collaborate early on with so you can be successful. Let's go ahead one. So the 4 critical steps that we identified are these: comprehensive collection, timeliness, relentless investigative follow-up, and a constant feedback loop. So I'll just briefly expound on them. Comprehensive collection doesn't mean that you only put in homicide casings or homicide guns. Think about it like this from an APHIS point of view. We've all grown used to fingerprints. You would never just put fingerprints in from homicide suspects and from homicide scenes because you would rarely get correlations. We put everybody into the system. We put all the criminals that we arrest into that universe, and then we run as many prints as possible to get as many identifications. That concept has to be applied to NIBIN. You don't know when you pick up the casing if the stop sign that was shot is going to be linked to whatever. So you may have even a domestic violence event where a drunk spouse fires a gun off in a house type thing. He's arrested. You know the case is not going to go anywhere because she's not going to show up eventually, or there'll be some problem with the domestic violence prosecution. But that's an opportunity. You have a known actor. You have a firearm. If you investigate that properly, if you look at that gun kind of like a child abuse investigation, you do a timeline at the front end as to when the actor had the gun, where it was purchased from, all those types of things. When you get your NIBIN results back and it's been used in a shooting or a robbery or a homicide or what have you, you already know who's responsible for it. It's an excellent opportunity to clear additional cases and hold offenders accountable. So timeliness. The big joke in my department 4 years ago, before we had a CJIC, was, I got the report from the lab, the NIBIN hit, the gun that, Jojo, the tire man's gun, hit on a homicide. And I turned to my partner and say, well, he's been in prison for 6 months and he doesn't get out for another 20 years. Let's go have lunch. And it was kind of a useless piece of information. The crime lab was wasting their time. We were wasting our time. And it had no relevance. By then, I had taken 100 more shootings. So being able to turn this information around before the next shooting is what you really are shooting for. That 24 to 72 hours to get that back into the hands of the investigator is priceless. Relentless follow-up. You have to constantly be looking at what you're getting out of NIBIN and where the opportunities are to solve cases and to hold suspects accountable. There's other things you should also be looking for as other proactive opportunities. There is a geographic component to NIBIN that I'll go on a little bit. It's not just investigative work. It can be applied at a patrol level. So, and ultimately the feedback loop. Everyone has to be involved, and you have to know what they're getting out of it. If they're not seeing what you think they could see out of this, if they're not getting the information quick enough, if there's missing information, you always have to have your end user, the officer on the street, the detective on the street, letting you know what's happening with what you're producing, and if it's helpful, if it's not, and how it can be tweaked. So if you can page ahead one. So our investigative philosophies, if you could click down one, was that we look at NIBIN as correlations as investigative leads. We don't require that they are processed by an examiner. Currently, there's only 2 in our state, and they are completely overwhelmed with homicide work. So we can't, that's not even an option for us. So we look at it almost as a field drug test, almost to the level of probable cause. Now, no one gets arrested off a NIBIN correlation unless there's other information that you can reasonably articulate into probable cause. But we utilize it to start the investigation. We put a premium on the now. What happened last night with shootings? What happened last night with gun arrests? How can we process those events, learn from them, and then inform our strategies or inform our investigations at that particular moment? So comprehensive e-trace, the follow-up on investigations targeting straw purchasers. We have a huge problem in Wisconsin with straw purchasers. We are our own worst enemy. The vast majority of crime guns in Wisconsin are coming from Wisconsin stores, from big box retailers. And as we crunch the data from e-trace, we start seeing trends and patterns of multiple purchases, of repeat purchases, and even denial information. So on the right-hand side here, you can page down one, please. So on the right-hand side of this page here, you have approximately 175 firearm-involved incidents. That's what those green dots are, in about a 2 square mile area over 7 weeks, 8 weeks in the summer. Now, if you were a sergeant and we're coming up for CompStat in 6 weeks, I'd say to you, a good sergeant's going to make those green dots disappear. So that's what your job is before CompStat. You got 6 weeks to do it. You're going to look at me like I'm crazy. So what if I gave you a little bit more information? Do you think you can make a good deployment strategy? So go ahead, one. So what if I told you that the red dots were all linked through NIBIN? That would probably help you. What if I told you that all those red dots were armed robberies? That would probably help you. If I gave you the suspect description and then we did a temporal analysis, what days of the week and time are those events happening? Could you, as a patrol sergeant, come up with a pretty effective plan on what to do? Of course you could. And that's exactly what this team did, and it led to the arrest of 3 armed robbers. And these were a armed robbery homicide crew to be. It's just a miracle they didn't end up killing anybody before we got them. But you can't leverage this type of data unless you're looking at it on a daily basis, seeing what you can see if there is a geographic component to it. Please go ahead. So one of the most important pieces of running a CJIC is triage. The most important thing is you can't work them all. There is a huge problem with NIBIN. It is that you usually get a huge amount of crime gun data, and it's hard to understand it all. So you have to realize you can't work every single NIBIN correlation. You have to triage it. You have to find a way to say, okay, what's important, what's could be important, and what's not important. So what we use is we use a 4-level system of priorities to be able to vet out our correlations. So I'll briefly run through them. So we have our priority CJIC correlations. Now these correlations are the most serious ones. Examples of those are NIBIN cases that are linked to homicides, armed robberies involving gang crews or case managements, recovered crime guns, firearm trafficking linkages, or the linkage is directly to a target of a task force. So if he's an ATF task force target, a FBI task force target, someone of that who's already become what we commonly refer to as a high value target, someone who has continuously committed crime, violent crime, and is a prolific offender. Those are our most important ones. Those are the ones that we coordinate directly with the original investigator, which is generally our Metro division handling the homicides, and then we will assign an investigator to assist with that, with the linkages. And usually that breaks out to be about 15% of what we're processing through. The next level is called the investigations. We call that the black level. And these are going to be a step below, but what you're seeing from these cases are your typical non-fatal shootings, armed robberies where a shot's been fired, business robberies where their shots have been fired, or 3 or more incidents. It doesn't matter really what it is. It could be a stop sign shooting. It could be 3 stop sign shootings, but it's got some solvability to it. Those will go to investigations and generally require a detective to put some time and effort into those. But there's generally going to be some solvability to them. We call our blue, our district level. That's an investigative lead that that's generally going to be misdemeanors. It will have some solvability to it, and it's not going to require a lot of time from the patrol officer. For an example, it would be a stop sign shooting and a simple carrying a concealed weapon arrest where the gun hits on the stop sign. It might be a photo array to show a witness, or it might just be a follow-up interview with the original suspect. And then our green, our situational awareness, we never want to hold back anything that has to do with gun intelligence and have something bad happen. So these are the cases where it's going to be a shot spotter alert where there isn't any witnesses. It's going to be a shots fired complaint where there isn't any witnesses. There really is no investigative follow-up. There's no possible leads on a suspect, but we're providing it to the district for situational awareness because we all know there's beat men out there that will have a name in their memo book that could link back to an address that they would say, oh, I know what that's about, why there's been 3 shots fired on that block. That's because so-and-so and so-and-so are arguing over drug territory or whatever it may be. So we want to make sure we get that out to everybody. So you can go ahead. So the big pieces that we find that are absolutely necessary to have a winning NIBIN program is obviously the lab. That's the hub of everything. Having the NIBIN, the IBIS lab, where you're able to do acquisitions of cartridge casings that are crime scenes and being able to test fire your crime guns in a timely manner is very, very important. Having physical control of that is what actually gets the lab going fast. And obviously being able to do your correlations in-house, I prefer, now that we have the National Correlation Center, if you're standing up a program that is an option, and I think it's a great option. Hopefully that option will grow in its capacity. The next piece is the triage that we just went through, knowing what's important, what's not important, and what you can actually follow up on within your investigative component or within your district level investigative ability. What we found with the amount of gunfire that we had and the amount of gun violence that we had to take the NIBIN generated investigations and create a small investigative team to be able to handle those on a regular basis. And that's what we call our NIBIN team. 6 dedicated detectives that just work those cases. And those are primarily those black investigations that I spoke about earlier. And finally, not all NIBIN cases can be worked effectively just because of witness issues and people not wanting to cooperate. So sometimes you will identify a prolific offender and then have to use alternate means. And that's where you get your task force involved to do an active targeting on the subject. What we do is we try to find what their other criminal activity is, whether it's narcotics trafficking, sex trafficking, whatever it is, and we use that weakness and exploit them, and we take them out of the community through an alternative prosecution. You can go ahead. So I'm just going to briefly run through one case study and get us on our way here. In May of last year, we had an officer-involved shooting. It was an armed robbery event, which led to a very close encounter gun battle, which thank goodness our officer survived even after being shot once. The suspect was killed during the event. We immediately did an expedited e-trace and found that the weapon had been purchased 27 days prior to the crime and recovery by a female buyer, and it was a multiple purchase, so this started to fit into the pattern of a straw purchaser. We immediately went to the big box retailer who had excellent surveillance, and if you can go ahead one more slide. We did this all within about 4 hours of the shooting, and we were able to actually secure this surveillance video of him filling out the form with the buyer and her actually passing the money off. When we picked her up at her place of employment, she wasn't even aware that the suspect had been killed at the time of the interview. So ultimately, we were able to identify her and hold her accountable as well. This is an example of using this data and having that dedicated team to be able to move quickly and effectively with this information. Go ahead. The final thing is our Center Street corridor. This is our ShotSpotter analysis. This is a 3 square mile area of our city that has the most gun violence. What we do is we do a 14-day analysis of the area to try to identify hotspots. Again, we believe we're getting 100% of the information going on because we have the blanket of ShotSpotter over there. It allows us to develop our deployments to these hotspots. We will break out each hotspot individually for temporal analysis, but then we also do a NIBIN analysis of what's going on in those specific hotspots as far as what's NIBIN telling us. Are the shooters crossing the city? Are they staying geographically in the same area, et cetera, et cetera. So NIBIN and these technologies are really only limited by your imagination and, of course, your manpower. And with that, I'll pass it back to Ron.
Okay, thank you, Captain Salazar. I would encourage you to download the presentation because there are some resources that are available, including a couple websites, but also Ultra Electronics provides pro bono 13 critical task workshops where they will come into a particular region on invitation and discuss how IBIS technology and the NIBIN program can work effectively to aid your area in developing our crime gun intelligence program. In addition, they offer customized crime gun intelligence workshops and wanted to remind you that webinar 4 is investigator strategies. Next. And if you want to contact any of the presenters, this is the way to go ahead and do it. They would be happy to answer any questions that you have. And Aaron, that is it for the presentation.
Great, thank you so much, Ron. We have received a number of really good questions. We'll get through as many as we can here. Our first question ends up coming from the state of Oregon. And the question is I believe this one's probably oriented towards you, Pam. How long when you enter does it take the NNCTC to turn around a potential presumptive match?
Yeah, that's a great question. We typically get the leads report 24 to 48 hours within the entry or acquisition. Sometimes it's called acquisition. You know, if we're actually thinking about it, the entry of the actual either test fired gun evidence or the crime scene evidence, the shell casings. From that acquisition point, once it's entered into NIBIN, it's 24 to 48 for a CTC report.
Great, thanks, Pam. Captain Salazar, Ron, did you guys want to weigh in on that one at all, or?
The NNCTC does provide they run 2 shifts. So their goal is 24-hour turnaround, but they don't work weekends. So anything that is submitted on a Friday will generally be returned on a Monday. However, the center right now is operating at maximum capacity. And if you want to be a part of the center, you can actually reach out to Sharon Buchanan, the NIBIN branch chief, and she can help facilitate that, or I know that they're putting together a wait list for that as well.
Great, thank you very much. Our next question comes from Florida, and this is the question. When talking about submitting your test fires, we submit our guns to our local state lab. I receive test fires in the box when it is returned to our agency. Are you saying that those test fires should be resent to the lab? And this question was submitted during your portion of the presentation, Pam.
So the guns are submitted, they're test fired, but they're not. If they're not entered, they should absolutely be entered. That's unless you have this particular gun is involved in a particular crime, and you're just doing a side-by-side comparison. You definitely want to get those test fires entered, and we consider them evidence, so they're chained. And, you know, logged and tracked completely. So in the downstream, when it goes to court, everything is covered as far as chain of evidence, chain of custody, and what was actually done on what date, kind of thing.
Great, thank you. I believe the next question is for you, Captain Salazar. Are there initiatives to get more rural law enforcement agencies involved in the system? And the explanation is many times rural agencies recover firearms but never enter them or e-trace them. They do not understand that many of these guns are being farmed out to rural felons by the metropolitan offenders, knowing that very few of these guns will ever be recovered or followed up by a rural agency. And I open that up to you, Captain Salazar, but certainly if anyone else has a response to that, please weigh in.
Again, I think that's part of the just getting the word out, the communication, either through informational bulletins that could possibly come from the lab or through CJIC, that any and all guns, any shell casings or cartridge casings from your crime scenes or shootings, target shootings, what have you, those should all be submitted and entered into NIBIN as soon as possible. That's the timeliness factor. I have to laugh. We had a detective call me yesterday from one of our smaller agencies within the county, and he had a gun from 1998 that was collected under suspicious circumstances. And he wanted to know if he should bring it to the lab for test fire and submission into NIBIN. And of course, I was absolutely, let's bring it in. Maybe it'll solve the Jimmy Hoffa case. I don't know. But these are the kinds of things where any kind of case, we don't know what the connection or the nexus is going to be. Rural versus decades old versus, innocently found at some kind of police contact. This is my dad's gun. He's never used it. And then you do an e-trace or an AFS. You find out it was stolen back in the day, and then it was recovered and returned. Those are any of those kinds of situations. Those are the kind of evidence that we need to have in NIBIN. So I would encourage some kind of outreach to the rural areas, or even we're in the process of setting up a regional NIBIN user regularly scheduled meeting that would include agencies and entities from outside the busier cities in my county to address the NIBIN leads and the CJIC process. So I would have to say that, as in any situation, communication is key, collaboration is critical.
Great, thank you very much. Captain Salazar, I wasn't sure if how much experience you all have as your regional center in working with rural agencies, or if there's something that you could weigh in on this one.
I'm sorry, I had a little bit of a technical problem. What was the question?
Oh, sure. So basically, there's a question with how do you get rural agencies more involved in a gun crime intelligence program? And I wasn't sure if you've got some experience you'd be able to share with us on that.
Well, two ways. We try to kind of use we have a part of our fusion center that does outreach already. And we have an 8-county area that stretches from urban Milwaukee to cornfields in some areas of the state. So what we do is we do basically marketing. We will, go visit that agency and do, I guess, a micro presentation about what we can do. And we will also look for opportunities, I want to say crises to exploit, but crises to exploit. When we see a shooting or a robbery or a firearm event in a neighboring community that doesn't normally experience those, we will generally reach out and say, hey, we'd like to process your evidence. We'd like to take a look at your casings. We'd like to do a test fire on your gun, because we found in other nearby locations, other neighboring communities, that we've found that we've been able to help them with their investigation, or their investigation has been able to help us. So generally, after we have one success with one of their neighbors, I start getting calls. I've had calls as far away as over 100 miles away saying, can we send you some evidence, because we heard you guys do good work. And it's really through networking and promoting it and saying, you know, I'm willing to be a free resource to you. We're not charging to do a indictment case. We're not charging to do a test fire. And like everything in policing, once you say free, everybody's ears.
That's true.
That's for sure. Great, thank you very much. The next question is coming from the state of Virginia. And it's kind of more of an investigative question. I'm not sure if that might be best for you again, Captain Salazar, but what happens if you have very little to work off of? And the scenario is we have 2 to 3 group shootings, no suspects, but there was a NIBIN connection between the casings. What would you suggest that they do next, given that they have no gun and no leads on suspects?
I'm sorry, so they've pushed it into NIBIN and they don't have any hits, correct?
Right, they've got connections between the casings, but no leads on suspects or and no weapon.
So no witnesses or any kind of video or shot spotter or anything along those lines?
I believe that's correct. I will see if they add any additional information and let you know. Well, generally what we would do is we would have our triage contractor or a lieutenant go through those cases and read them, you know, word for word, and look for the opportunities. Well, is there anything that was missed in the initial? Was there a witness that was not interviewed? Was there a plate that wasn't followed up on? You know, if it happened obviously there's going to be a geographic component. You can also look back at similar crimes at the MO and try to come up with investigative leads that way. It's all about how inventive you want to be and how much time you have to invest in an individual case.
Yeah, I agree with that. I'd also add, we've had shootings in the middle of the night. Deputies will respond. They'll pick up 9 to 10, 40 cal casings, and they'll say no injuries. They'll do a ready net to check for any victims at the nearby local hospitals, and kind of leave it at that. We've actually sent our CSI personnel out on some of these allegedly no injury shootings, and they found the blood. So, you know, if you got good intel, you know, maybe there's shootings and we're missing, there's other factors that are overlooked, or maybe not there, you know, there's not the right resources to find additional forensic information that can connect the dots. But I would say that if these are 2 to 3 group shootings and it's just target practice, you may have to wait till there is some blood at your scene or some form of injury. But if you have that opportunity to send out your crime scene folks that have maybe a little bit more experience in looking for blood stain or blood droplets or shed blood in any way or form. It turned out in this particular case that I'm referring to, it was a daytime shooting. So my CSI people went right out with the original deputies. Deputies didn't find anything. And then they flashed the underneath a car and they saw some kind of almost like a backdrop of bloodstain pattern that was never going to be found by just first responders. So I guess my point is if those shootings, those groups of shootings continue, maybe you want to send out some extra personnel to double check and confirm that there's no other form of forensic evidence. But it does seem to help, or just training deputies on, you know, looking at things from a 360-degree perspective, because certainly when you're just concentrating on just collecting the shell casings, you may miss the other types of evidence that's out there. So I would just add that if it's a continued thing where these groups of shootings are occurring, maybe you need to follow it up with a CSI response.
Right. Thank you very much.
Go ahead. The only thing I would also say is going back out and doing a recanvass during the hours of daylight can yield a tremendous amount of leads.
Absolutely. Totally agreed.
Knock on some doors, huh? Well, and the person asking the question, just so you know, did confirm that they don't have any other leads other than the NIBIN hits, and that the witnesses are notoriously uncooperative within the town. So I'm sure that's not a unique experience for this particular officer. Our next question is, Pam, I believe this one is for you based on some of the graphics that you shared. The question is, what could explain the doubling of firearms service requests from 2015 to 2016? Was it an increase in crime activity, or was it the success that you had in the other investigations?
Oh, I believe it was, it's related to the success. The fact that we're turning around cases almost in real time versus, you know, you submit a request and then you don't hear back from the lab for 6 months or a year. I did a lot of training back in my day for detectives and officers, first responders. And that was one of the things that you always hear, why can't you be like CSI on TV? Well, I'd like to say that we are like CSI on TV anymore because we're getting that information. And so people are recognizing that if you turn the evidence in, we'll get the information to you back in a record time. And that just breeds success, right? Because the word is getting out that, hey, there's no charge for no, there's no expense related to submitting this evidence to the lab. We're going to get information as soon as humanly possible. And there's only good that's going to come out of it. That's the only explanation I can find for the doubling of requests. Crime rates have actually dropped in the county. So that defies, the statistics. But the fact that the word is out that the lab is taking care of business, I think has really changed up how people see our purpose. And just like Captain Salazar said, it's a collaborative effort. We're doing the front end loading. It's up to the detectives and the investigators to finish up and tie it up, and the DA's participation. But we're just going off the charts as far as requests. It's even, like I said, it's more than doubled at this point.
Great, thank you, Captain Salazar. Did you want to weigh in at all on that question?
I think some of it's going to be, at least from our experience, our leads increased whenever we would put more into it, meaning we added a technician in the evening so we could leverage NIBIN processing 16 hours a day, and we saw an increase in our production. We started initially just with cartridge casings. We built a shoot room in our basement and started doing test fires, and we saw our correlations go through the roof because of the way our criminals would use their guns multiple times. So depending on your structure, you could see an artificial increase. Like what we saw, those things were happening before we started being able to house or pull out the data. But it was still happening back then. We just didn't know it at the time. The same thing happened when we added ShotSpotter. We started finding out more about what was going on in the street. We weren't actually impacting it. We were just more informed of what was going on.
Great. Well, thank you all very much. And I apologize. I know that we have a lot of other questions that unfortunately we didn't get to. We're already 12 minutes over time. I want to thank Ultra Electronics Forensic Technology. I definitely want to thank our three presenters today and encourage you to go back to the Justice Clearinghouse and make sure that you sign up for number 4 in this series of 6 webinars. And with that, this concludes today's Justice Clearinghouse webinar. I hope everyone stays safe and has a great day. Bye now.
Thank you.
Thank you.